next like to welcome Rebekah Chapman and Deborah Kelso from the Queensland Police Service. Thank you.
Alrighty, I'm going to have some water. Good morning. My name's Deborah Kelso. I'm a Senior Research and Evaluation Officer with the Queensland Police Research and Evaluation Unit. Joining me today is my colleague, Dr. Rebekah Chapman, Principal Research and Evaluation Officer. Together, we will be presenting the long-term evaluation findings of a protective security project conducted on Palm Island. We'd like to begin today by respectfully acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to elders past and present. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Palm Island, the Mambara people, and the Indigenous Bulkaman people and their descendants. So before outlining the protective security project we'll be discussing, I'd like to briefly highlight recent research that reinforces the broader social and cultural value of community-based First Nations employment. A 2024 study by Dowry and colleagues found that community-based employment strengthens wellbeing, cultural connections, aspirations, and resilience for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Participants in the study also reported increased empowerment, stronger goal setting, and greater engagement with community and culture. Importantly, these outcomes extend well beyond economic participation. So over to the project now. Protective Service Officers are members of the Queensland Police Service, and they sit within the Protective Services Group of the Security and Counter-Terrorism Command. These officers have legislated powers under the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act of 2000 to provide security to Queensland Government building and assets. Okay, so in 2020, the Protective Services Group launched its First Nations project. This project is designed to recruit, train and employ local First Nations people as Senior Protective Service Officers. Successful candidates complete a 4.5-week training course at the Townsville Police Academy and are then deployed within their own communities, where they provide protective security to government agencies on a fee-for-service basis. Historically, government security at these locations has been by contracted private security guards who often fly in and fly out. Okay, so the pilot for this project began on Palm Island in 2020. Palm Island is an Aboriginal community located 65 kilometres north of Townsville. It has approximately 4,000 residents who are the descendants of more than 50 different tribal groups. The Protective Security Project was conceptualised in response to a series of incidents on Palm Island where non-local security guards contracted through protective services were being targeted with crime, rock throwing and damage to property. These incidents highlighted that the existing fly-in, fly-out security model was not effective or well received by the community. Today, First Nations Senior Protective Service Officers are deployed across multiple sites on Palm Island for government agencies, including the Department of Education, Department of Justice and Attorney General, and Catholic Education. So in 2021, our unit conducted 2 evaluations of the rollout of this project. Phase 1 was a process evaluation, which assessed project delivery, implementation, recruitment and training. And phase 2 was a medium-term outcomes assessment, which assessed project delivery, stakeholder perceptions, relationships, crime rates and service delivery costs. Okay, in 2023, our unit was requested by Protective Services Group to conduct an evaluation of the expansion of the First Nations project. This project previously expanded to Yarrabah in 2022 and Bamaga, Lockhart River and Warrabinda in 2024. Recognising the unique opportunity this presented, along with the agreement of our clients, we broadened the evaluation scope to include a long-term outcome assessment of Palm Island, 4 years post-implementation. Long-term evaluations like this are very rare in government settings, yet they can reveal critical insights often missed by short and medium-term outcome assessments. To explore these long-term impacts more deeply, we conducted case studies with 4 First Nations Senior Protective Service officers who are part of the first recruit group and remain employed in their role present day. Our long-term evaluation, delivered in July 2025, assessed the sustained outcomes of the First Nations project on Palm Island. Key evaluation areas included recruitment and training, role perceptions, employment opportunities, safety and prevention, and governance and sustainability. And as mentioned previously, as part of our evaluation, we conducted a series of case studies featuring 4 original First Nations Senior Protective Service officers from the original 2020 cohort. Larry, Frank, Jamie and Sean generously shared their stories with us during research conversations held on Palm Island in 2024. Our team then constructed these narratives to explore the long-term impacts of the project at the individual level and from a broader community perspective. Each officer was then given the opportunity to review their case study, confirm its accuracy, and provide informed consent for its inclusion in the evaluation. To respect and protect their privacy, we did use pseudonyms, and all case studies are de-identified. These powerful personal accounts, alongside wider evaluation findings, will now be explored in greater detail by my colleague Rebekah.
Okay, thanks Dee. So, in evaluating the First Nations Protective Services Officer program on Palm Island and also the other communities that it's since expanded to, we've ensured that our research methodologies have been guided not only by the NHMRC National Statement on Human Research, but also the appropriate guidelines for research with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities. And that includes the relevant NHMRC guidelines as well as the principles of culturally safe evaluations outlined by the Australian Evaluation Society and also the IATSIS Code of Ethics for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander research. And I've outlined the various values and principles of these guidelines on this slide. And down below in bold, I've really highlighted the various values from across these guiding documents that we've really sought to embody in this research going through this process. And those have included really genuine collaborative engagement and partnership with the community, and particularly with our First Nations Protective Services officers, pardon me, as you'll see through their case studies when I present those, and allowing time to develop those partnerships and to be flexible in our engagements and ensuring that we've really applied a strength-focused lens throughout our research and evaluation processes, and also making sure that we've been transparent and accountable throughout the process, and that we're feeding back about the impact and the use of this research and the data in meaningful and appropriate ways through ongoing partnerships. So as part of that collaborative engagement process, we initially revisited Palm Island to really understand the community's response to our plans for this long-term phase of the research and to determine their support for us coming back to conduct research in the community again. So in June 2024, the research team, and that's myself and Deborah and the Manager of Research and Evaluation, Sandra Smith, we all travelled to Palm Island to engage with the various community representatives, and that includes members of the Palm Island Aboriginal Shire Council, the Palm Island Community Company and Community Justice Group, the Rainbow Bridge Employment Service, as well as the QPS officers that are stationed on Palm Island and the First Nations Senior Protective Services Officers. You will hear me refer to them as FNSPSOs. It's just easier, and also SPSOs throughout. And also school leadership at both the state and Catholic school on Palm Island as their primary service clients. So the team had obviously already built relationships with these stakeholder groups for the earlier phases of the evaluation, but obviously some of the key people in these roles had changed over time, so we wanted to reconnect and rebuild those relationships. And each of those stakeholders and community representatives we spoke to were really supportive of us coming back and doing that long-term phase of the research. So we were able to include their support in our application for ethical approval through the Townsville Hospital and Health Human Research Ethics Committee, and also the Department of Education and Catholic Education Queensland as per the research governance processes. And so following all of that pre-engagement, we returned to Palm Island in October 2024 to conduct the research. So the research itself was primarily qualitative and involved really in-depth discussions in the community with particularly the Protective Services Officers to fully understand their stories associated with their employment in these roles since the beginning of the project in 2020. And also discussions with community representatives and police officers stationed on the island. And again, not just school leadership, but all school employees. So that includes locals as well as non-locals employed in the education system on Palm Island as key clients. We also accessed some quantitative data, which I'm not going to go into today. I think the last presentation was very quant heavy, which really enabled insight into the long-term impact of the project on crime on Palm Island. And that we did that in a few ways, which I won't go into detail of today, just in the interest of time, except it did involve analysis of offence data at specific locations in the community that Protective Services Officers are actively patrolling, as well as analysis of Protective Services Officers' own incident reporting. So we also initially accessed QPS HR data to give a picture of the current status of employment into the FNSPSO role on Palm Island. And as you can see here, there are currently 12 locals employed as Protective Services Officers in Palm. And that's grown since the initial recruitment of 7 people in 2020. And notably, 3 of those initial 7 employed have retained their positions, so they've got greater than 4 years of service in the role. And another of the initial recruits resigned in 2022 and then subsequently reapplied and was reappointed in 2024. And recent recruitment rounds have resulted in a younger workforce on Palm. So the proportion aged 18 to 24 is currently at 50%, so 6 of the 12 employees. And just 1 of the current Protective Services Officers on the island is female, which isn't actually reflective of the project as it's expanded into other communities. Across the whole project, as it's expanded, the proportion of females employed in these roles currently sits at just below 50%. So at this point, I'd really like to introduce you to the 4 continuing officers who were recruited in 2020, and they're still employed or have been re-employed into the role. So as Dee mentioned, these narratives were written based on the conversations that we had with the FNSPSOs throughout the data collection period, and they were endorsed by them as reflecting their stories. So I'm just sharing the intro of them now, but throughout the report for the evaluation and also throughout the rest of the results in this presentation, you can see little snapshots of their stories that align with the key evaluation themes that we were looking at. So I'm going to try and read them out just so, because I feel they're really important. So Larry was originally appointed for the SPSO role after being encouraged by a past supervisor, as he was unemployed at the time. He's a quiet and considered man and suggests that I probably wasn't the best candidate for the job because that's the way that I am. I'm always in the background. He describes how he's become more comfortable with himself and the role over time. I'm more at ease with myself and what I do. He's been continuously employed in the role for the past 4 years. Jamie originally applied for the SPSO role as she was unemployed at the time and felt motivated to do something different to her previous roles, which had been in administration and cleaning. And Jamie expresses how her commitment to her ongoing employment has evolved over time. So when I first started, I was kind of slackening off, like, should I stay in the job, should I go into work, or should I stay home? And then I forced myself to go in. I didn't think I'd really stick it out. Hey, I didn't think I was going to last this long, and this is the longest I've ever been in an actual job. Sean originally applied for the position to experience something new. He particularly liked the idea of joining the police service and aspired to a better life, more money. Sean resigned from the role in 2022 due to personal reasons. However, he reapplied in 2024 and undertook recruit training for a second time. On describing his reasons for returning to the role, Sean said, I like it, hey, I like this job. You get some good respect around the island here, some good feedback from them, especially the kids. And finally, Frank had aspirational reasons for joining the QPS. He says that his goal was to look after the community. Kids were burning bins on the road and everything. I would see these kids that were running amok. That's why I put in for the job, to settle them down. Frank has a great deal of pride in his role, and he encourages his team members to be proactive on duty. That's what I tell the other mob when it's lunchtime: go walk around, talk to the kids. Frank has also become involved in encouraging young community members to apply for the role as they've become available. So initially in 2020, there was some apprehension from the new protective services officers about how they'd be perceived in the community, particularly working with police and for police. And there was some initial scepticism among stakeholders in the community about the sustainability of the project. The results of this long-term follow-up, though, have indicated that it's really made substantial progress and gained trust in the community over the past 5 years. And the FNSPSOs in particular spoke of how they feel they're seen as positive role models in the community, and that perception also extended to other project stakeholders, including the community representatives and clients. And we also observed a really large positive change in the self-confidence of the recruits, who are now all really comfortable in their roles and who are perceived as having come a long way in themselves and how they are particularly respected members of the community. Also, the employment skills and ongoing skill development of the FNSPSOs are regarded positively, not just for those roles themselves in QPS, but also more broadly for if and when they want to transition to other roles or even further within the police service. We also found some evidence of shifting relationships between the community and police, and comments relating to this were received from across a range of stakeholder groups. And as I mentioned previously, there was some initial apprehension among the group in terms of how they'd be perceived working for police. But both the protective services officers and police officers, as well as other community stakeholders, all indicated that this project has gone some way to altering the perception of police in the community. And I think that's shown really well by this quote in the middle there by one of the protective services officers. So it's changed the way people think about police. My brother, he hated police. As soon as I came to this job, he's got no beef with police. I tell you, he'd throw rocks at them and everything. He don't even bother them now. And also this comment by one of the police officers, just that involvement of FNSPSOs with the QPS uniform and the badge, kind of like it's not all bad. That's what we're trying to do. There's 10 positive things about policing. It's not just locking people up, especially not here. So in regards to the long-term impact on crime, I will just caveat this slide by saying, of course, there have been other initiatives that have operated targeting crime across the period. We aren't able to attribute anything directly to the First Nations Protective Services Officer project. The graph here, though, does show the number of property offences, and I've singled out property offences because that's primarily what the project is targeting in regards to protection of government buildings. So it shows the number of property offences by location from the year prior to the project implementation in 2020, as well as the previous 5-year average, and across each year following project implementation up to 2024. And you can see when you look at both the grey line and the yellow line, and that represents government and education properties, there's been a sustained decrease from that high of 86, I believe, offences at government sites and 31 offences at education sites in that year prior to the project, to just the most recent year when we saw 9 property offences committed at government sites and 3 at education sites on Palm Island. And when we talked to the team themselves, they have a really strong sense of their effectiveness in these roles, particularly in that they know the community, they know the kids, and they act particularly as a deterrent in that way. And teachers and staff at the schools also expressed the same view. They see the effectiveness of the FNSPSOs, particularly in regard to their relationship with the kids and the young people in the community and their families. So while there were a number of positive outcomes identified over the long term of the project, there were of course also a number of issues and challenges that arose throughout the evaluation process. So for example, some clients did express that service delivery had slipped somewhat over time and indicated that there recently been a lack of proactivity among the team and active foot patrols, which seemed to align with a period of reduced on-site supervision of the team. And several of the protective services officers also indicated that over their time with the QPS, they would have liked to see some expansion of their responsibilities and their reach in terms of their patrol locations, which have remained fairly consistent over time. There's also opportunities to strengthen the pathways available to the team in regards to their progression and growth in their careers. We've seen one example of a senior protective services officer on Palm Island moving to a protective services officer role in the greater southeast Queensland and needed to do some additional training to move into that role. And it's hoped that pathways like those are further identified and made easier to access if people do want them moving forward. And there's also been an identified need for increasing both the formal and informal mentoring opportunities available to the team on Palm Island, particularly in the initial stages of recruitment and employment, to really provide that scaffolding around new and younger employees who may never have been in the workforce before and may not have seen that engagement in employment role modelled so much, but also over the longer term as they progress in the role and become more used to the operations. And all of those identified issues are being fed back through our evaluation reporting, so hopefully impact on change moving forward. Also, although we found some indication of shifting relationships between police and community, the evaluation did find that there was some opportunity for increased collaboration, integration and further embedding of the project into the local community policing model. So despite some challenges, there's been recent examples of the team assisting police, particularly in this example highlighted where the group were able to locate a missing person due to their specific local knowledge. And it's also been acknowledged by police that officers don't fully understand how they can incorporate these new staff members into policing operations, even still 4 to 5 years down the track. And so that's something we've identified as important to focus on moving forward. So I just wanted to summarise by highlighting some of the challenges, but also the benefits of doing long-term evaluation research like this, not just from a crime and justice perspective, but also in regards to carrying out research in First Nations communities. And I'll start with the challenges, including firstly ongoing engagement, which I've actually also listed as a benefit. But Palm Island is remote and it costs a lot of money to fund researchers to be able to properly engage with First Nations communities for projects like this. So we really needed to develop those trusted collaborative relationships with communities before we can ask for their support for research to be conducted, and remote methods of engaging are just not viable. Also, as Queensland Police staff members, we didn't want to audio record discussions for this research, and so for ethics purposes and to ensure we're accurately representing information, we needed to be a team of 3 to travel across multiple community visits for the expansion of the project. And needless to say, that all involves a great investment of time and money, and we're really grateful that QPS and Protective Services Group saw value in the work and enabled it to happen. So there, on the other hand, there are numerous benefits that, in my perspective, greatly outweigh those costs. And the ability to engage in an ongoing way with the community is one of them. So we're really privileged to have been able to revisit the community and talk with the people and tell their stories about the ongoing impact of this project on them and the community, and also to work with them to identify areas for improvement, to build those next steps for them staying in those roles and shaping them into the future. And in showcasing the impact of the project, we're actively building capacity for that team to continue successfully in their roles, and also identifying learnings for the QPS so that projects don't just stagnate into the longer term, but they're able to continuously improve and strengthen their impact as they move into that ongoing business as usual phase, which is currently in progress. I believe that's all I have. This is the team's contact details. If you'd like to get in touch with us, happy to answer any questions today or later or online as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Deborah and Rebekah. So we'll open up the floor for questions. We might have time for 1 or 2. Yep, just at the back. Great, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Did you do any evaluation on the community perspective of this project?
No, unfortunately that was outside of the scope of this project. We weren't able to talk with community members themselves, and that's why we really sought hard to speak with the representatives community, particularly the council members and people who could talk about the perceptions of community that they had experienced through their discussions and things like that. But no, not viable for us to be able to conduct any research directly with community members.
Great. Just to follow up, so some of the data you showed very briefly, which I think people would really be interested in, but it seemed to be like your KPI was around damage to government buildings. Is that correct? That
Yes.
that was the purpose of this project.
Yes, so the Protective Services Officers do provide security to just government buildings. So on Palm Island, that's, yes, the education sites and the courthouse and, yeah.
Any other questions on the floor? No? I had a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned earlier that there was quite a bit of scepticism in the community when you initially announced the program. I was just wondering, when you found out that there was quite a bit of apprehension in the community, how do you go about framing the opportunity to encourage people in the community to apply for it, since it was such a great employment opportunity?
Yeah, that's right. And I think what do you call it? The desire among community members to apply for that role has really shifted over time. So initially, there were a few, through contacts in unemployment and recruitment in general across all of these communities has been a significant challenge, particularly in the early stages. So it's not just skepticism among, the wider community. It's within the police, it's within, the different stakeholder groups. And so I know there was apprehension, but, just getting those initial one or two people who were, maybe discussed the role with the employment service, community people that we'd been engaging with, initially applied. And from then, it's really just been a natural process of sort of the people in those roles have been really working to develop perceptions of the project and how it's working for the community to enable particularly younger people, as you see through the slides in terms of employment, to consider that as an opportunity, particularly when they're leaving school. Yeah, so it's developed over time for sure. And it's interesting as we move into the other communities to see that sort of repeating itself and knowing that that process is going to, take time and that hopefully it will evolve similarly to how it did on Palm Island. Yeah.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's all for questions. Thank you, guys.